History remembers the brilliant generals and the visionary leaders, but it often forgets the absolute legends of deception, the con artists whose schemes were so bizarre, so utterly insane, that they somehow worked. We're not talking about petty pickpockets. We're talking about the Hall of Fame hustlers who sold non-existent countries and started global religions with a simple party trick. Today, we peel back the curtain on the most audacious frauds in history, the ones that will make you laugh, gasp, and seriously question humanity's collective intelligence. 1. Imagine having the guts to not just lie on your resume, but to invent an entire country from scratch and appoint yourself its leader. That was Gregor MacGregor, a Scotsman who clearly thought "go big or go home" was a personal motto. In the 1820s, he cooked up the fictional nation of Poyais in Central America. He didn't just mention it in passing. He wrote a whole travel guide for it, probably over a long weekend with some tea and a wild imagination. He described a paradise with fertile soil and gold nuggets just lying around. He then sold land deeds and government bonds to eager British investors. People packed their bags and sailed across the ocean, only to discover that Poyais was actually a mosquito-infested, disease-ridden swamp with zero amenities. He didn't just sell them a lie, he sold them a geography. 2. Selling the Brooklyn Bridge is a classic joke, but for George C. Parker, it was a full-time job with a surprisingly high success rate. This guy had the unshakable confidence of someone explaining a movie plot they've only seen the trailer for. He would stroll up to bright-eyed tourists, flash some professionally forged documents, and sell them one of New York's most famous landmarks, sometimes twice a week. His sales pitch was that the new owner could make a fortune by setting up a toll booth. Inevitably, the new owner would be escorted off their new property by police officers trying very hard not to laugh. When he got bored of the bridge, he'd sell the Statue of Liberty or Grant's tomb. The man looked at public monuments and saw nothing but pure, untapped revenue streams. 3. If you're going to pretend to be someone's kid, you might as well aim for the top. Cassie Chadwick looked at the list of 19th-century billionaires, pointed at steel tycoon Andrew Carnegie, and said, "Yep, that's my dad." She never said it out loud, of course. That would be too obvious. Instead, she just accidentally dropped forged promissory notes for millions, signed by her dear old secret papa. Bankers, smelling a connection to one of the world's biggest fortunes, practically threw money at her. They gave her millions in loans, no questions asked. She lived a life of pure opulence, all on the credit of a man she'd never even met. The sheer audacity is what makes it art. She didn't just build a house of cards, she built a gilded mansion on a foundation of pure fiction. 4. Meet Jefferson, Soapy Smith, the man who built a criminal empire on the humble bar of soap. During the Klondike Gold Rush, he perfected a scam that was part street magic, part psychological warfare. He'd set up a suitcase, wrap a few bars of soap in big money bills, and mix them in with dozens of plain bars. For just a few bucks, you could buy a bar and maybe, just maybe, win $100. Of course, the only people ever seen winning were his own friends planted in the crowd, who would hoot and holler with joy. He was selling the dream of getting rich quick to a town already full of people who had that dream. He wasn't really in the soap business. He was in the far more lucrative business of manufactured hope. 5. The term confidence man had to come from somewhere, and it started with a guy whose scam was so polite and bizarre, it's almost admirable. In the 1840s, a well-dressed fellow named William Thompson would approach a wealthy stranger on the streets of New York. After some charming chit-chat, he'd ask a simple question. "Have you confidence in me to trust me with your watch until tomorrow?" The request was so strange, so disarmingly direct, that people felt too awkward to say no. They'd hand over their gold watch, and Thompson would politely stroll away, never to be seen again. He didn't use a weapon or a threat. He weaponized social etiquette. He proved that sometimes the most effective way to rob someone is to just ask nicely. 6. Ever wonder how to talk to the dead? Apparently, the secret is in your feet. In the mid-19th century, two teenage sisters, Kate and Maggie Fox, convinced the world they could communicate with spirits. The ghosts would respond with a series of mysterious rapping sounds. Their fame exploded, they toured the country, and essentially launched the entire religion of spiritualism. Decades later, the big secret came out. The ghostly raps were the sound of the sisters cracking their toe and ankle joints under the table. They started a global movement based on a trick every bored kid in class has tried. Even after they publicly confessed and demonstrated the toe cracking, many of their followers simply refused to believe it. The truth was just less interesting than a good ghost story from beyond the grave. 7. For most criminals, getting arrested is a career-ending move. For Big Bertha Heyman, it was more like a strategic relocation to a new office with a captive audience. In the 1880s, this so-called confidence queen ran some of her best scams from behind bars. She convinced everyone, from guards to lawyers, that she was a wealthy heiress who had been framed by her evil family. She'd get them to give her money for her legal defense or to invest on her behalf, promising massive returns once she regained her non-existent fortune. She was so charming and her story so tragic that she turned the entire penal system into her personal fundraising gala. The woman could probably sell sand in the Sahara, all while wearing prison stripes. 8. Some con artists steal your watch. Others steal your life savings. And then there's Lord Gordon Gordon, a man whose scamming was so next level it almost started a war between the United States and Canada. This guy, who was neither a lord nor named Gordon, charmed his way into the circles of the super-rich in the 1870s. He managed to swindle railroad tycoon Jay Gould out of a fortune in stock. When the con was exposed, he fled to Canada. An incredibly angry Gould then hired his own private posse to cross the border and kidnap him back. Canada was, to put it mildly, not okay with this. The situation escalated into a full-blown international incident, with troops being moved to the border. All because one guy with a fake accent was just too good at lying. 9. Ferdinand Ward had a simple, elegant business plan. Become best friends with the son of a former president, then use that connection to fleece the entire nation. He teamed up with Ulysses S. Grant Jr. to start a Wall Street firm, which gave him access to the general himself. Ward, known as the Napoleon of Finance, convinced the war hero Grant, a man who could command 1 million soldiers but couldn't read a balance sheet, to invest his entire life savings. Ward's firm was a classic Ponzi scheme, paying out massive profits using money from new investors. He was basically the financial equivalent of a guy trying to fill a bucket with a hole in it by just pouring water in faster and faster. When it inevitably collapsed, it didn't just wipe out rich investors. It completely bankrupted President Grant, leaving the man who saved the Union with about $80 to his name. 10. In the late 19th century, Sarah Howe looked at the world of finance, saw it was run by men, and decided she could scam people just as well, if not better. She created the Ladies' Deposit, a bank exclusively for unmarried women and widows. Her sales pitch was pure genius. Men are untrustworthy with money, so let a fellow woman handle your savings. She promised an insane 8% interest per month, which is the kind of math that should make anyone suspicious. But she was so charming, and her cause so seemingly noble, that women lined up to give her their money. Of course, the bank was just her living room, and the investments consisted of her spending everyone's cash on a lavish lifestyle. She wasn't a financial pioneer, she was just running a Ponzi scheme with better tea and doilies. 11. Sometimes the best way to win an argument is to spend a year and a fortune carving a 10-foot-tall statue out of gypsum, bury it on your cousin's farm, and then have it discovered by well-diggers. That's exactly what George Hull did in 1869 to prove a point to a preacher about giants in the Bible. The result was the Cardiff Giant, a massive petrified man that became one of the biggest tourist attractions in America. People paid good money to stare in awe at what was, essentially, a giant clumsy piece of rock art. The hoax was so successful that showman P.T. Barnum offered a fortune to buy it. When Hull refused, Barnum just made his own fake of the fake giant and put it on display, which people also paid to see. It was a masterclass in American ingenuity and gullibility. 12. One day in 1817, a cobbler in a small English village found a young woman wandering around looking confused and speaking a language no one could understand. She was beautiful, wore an exotic turban, and eventually conveyed through gestures that she was Princess Caribou from the island of Javasu in the Indian Ocean. For 10 weeks, she was the toast of high society. Academics studied her gibberish language, and aristocrats were honored to have her in their homes. Then, a former employer recognized her. She was actually Mary Baker, a cobbler's daughter from Devon, who was just exceptionally committed to the bit. Her entire royal persona, exotic language and all, was something she had completely made up in her head. She fooled the smartest people in the country because nobody wanted to admit they couldn't understand a princess. 13. Most con men have modest goals: a wallet, some jewelry, maybe a rich widow's inheritance. James Revis, however, decided he wanted the entire state of Arizona. In the 1880s, he unveiled a collection of ancient-looking Spanish documents that proved his wife was the heir to a massive land grant from the King of Spain, a grant that covered about 12 million acres of Arizona and New Mexico. This wasn't just a single forged deed, it was a masterpiece of fraud. He had created hundreds of documents, inserted fake pages into historical archives, and basically invented a centuries-long family history. For a while, it worked. The Southern Pacific Railroad paid him $50,000 for right-of-way, and people living on his land paid him fees. He wasn't just the Baron of Arizona. He was the king of long con dedication. 14. In 1835, the New York Sun newspaper published a series of articles that made the scientific discovery of the century. A famous astronomer, using a powerful new telescope, had found life on the moon. And it wasn't just microbes. The newspaper described, in breathless detail, vast forests, blue oceans, and herds of bison-like creatures. Most famously, it described human-like beings with giant bat wings who flew around all day. The public went absolutely insane. The Great Moon hoax became the talk of the world, and the newspaper's circulation skyrocketed. The entire story, of course, was a complete fabrication, likely written to satirize other crazy scientific theories of the time. But people believed it, proving that if a story is sensational enough, you don't really need facts. You just need bat people. 15. Before there were reality television stars, there was Louis de Rougemont. In 1898, he captivated the world with his story of being a castaway for 30 years in the wilds of Australia. His tales were incredible. He claimed to have built a house out of coral, ridden giant sea turtles across the ocean like they were personal watercraft, and fought off hordes of cannibals. He became an overnight celebrity, giving lectures to packed houses. There was only one small issue. Pretty much every single word was a lie. He had lived in Australia, but as a butler, not a heroic turtle-riding survivalist. His adventures were so cartoonishly over the top that it's amazing anyone believed them in the first place, but people wanted a hero, and he was more than happy to invent one. 16. If you've ever received an email from a prince who needs your help getting his fortune out of the country, you can thank the Spanish prisoner scam. This is the great-great-grandfather of all modern email fraud, dating back to the 16th century. The setup was a work of art. You'd receive a letter from a fellow countryman who was in a Spanish prison with a wealthy nobleman. This nobleman had a beautiful daughter and a hidden treasure, but he couldn't get to it. If you, a kind stranger, would just send some money to bribe the guards, you would be rewarded with a massive chunk of the treasure in the hand of the beautiful daughter in marriage. It was a perfect trap, mixing greed with a dash of romance, and it has worked in various forms for over 400 years. 17. While most forgers are just trying to make a quick buck, Tom O'Brien was an artist, and his medium was counterfeit money. In the late 19th century, O'Brien produced fake bills that were so ridiculously high quality that they were often considered superior to the real government-issued currency. His super notes had better paper, sharper printing, and more vibrant ink. It got to the point where bank tellers would sometimes set aside O'Brien's fakes as the standard to judge real money against. The man wasn't just a criminal, he was an overachiever in the wrong field. He elevated illegal activity to a form of craftsmanship, creating a product so good that its only real flaw was that it was a felony to possess. 18. William Mumler found a brilliant way to cash in on the public's fascination with the afterlife. He invented spirit photography. In the 1860s, he discovered that he could produce portraits with a ghostly, transparent figure hovering in the background. He claimed these were the spirits of his sitter's departed loved ones, dropping in to say a spooky hello. People, desperate to connect with the deceased, flocked to his studio. His most famous photo was of Mary Todd Lincoln with the ghostly figure of her assassinated husband, Abraham Lincoln, standing behind her. The ghosts, of course, were just the result of a simple double exposure, meaning Mumler was basically just bad at clearing his camera plates between sessions and decided to call it a feature, not a bug. 19. If you were a wealthy but childless couple in late 18th century London, Dr. James Graham had the solution for you: the celestial bed. This was no ordinary piece of furniture. It was a 12 by 9-foot marvel, filled with hair from the tails of English stallions and decorated with automated musical instruments that played soft music. It was also electrified and packed with magnets, supposedly to create a procreative spark. For the low price of £50 a night, an absolutely astronomical sum at the time, couples could rent the bed and its stimulating environment to guarantee the conception of a perfect child. It was the ultimate piece of high-end quackery, a theatrical spectacle that promised medical miracles through the power of interior design and questionable physics. 20. Adam Worth was less of a common criminal and more of a walking, talking criminal mastermind from a fancy novel. Known as the Napoleon of crime, he was the inspiration for Sherlock Holmes's nemesis, Professor Moriarty. Worth ran a vast international crime syndicate in the late 19th century, but he did it with style. He never used violence and presented himself as a refined gentleman. His most famous act was stealing a valuable painting of the Duchess of Devonshire, not for money, but simply because he liked it. He then traveled with the rolled-up canvas in his luggage for years. He was a crook who appreciated the finer things in life, proving that you can run a massive illegal enterprise and still maintain the social graces of a man attending the opera. 21. In 1814, a man dressed in a military uniform rode into London and announced the best news anyone had heard in years. Napoleon Bonaparte was dead. The city erupted in celebration, but a small group of fraudsters weren't celebrating. They were at the stock exchange. Knowing the news would cause the market to soar, they had bought up huge amounts of government stock at low prices. As the fake news spread, prices skyrocketed, and they sold everything for a massive profit. By the time everyone realized Napoleon was very much alive and they'd been had, the scammers were gone. It was one of history's first examples of financial fake news, a perfectly executed lie that crashed the market and made a few men incredibly rich in a single afternoon. 22. For over 20 years, inventor John Keeley captivated investors with his miracle machine, an engine that could power a factory using nothing but a pint of water. He claimed to have harnessed a new etheric force that could produce limitless energy. During demonstrations, his machine would hum, shake, and bend iron bars, dazzling everyone who saw it. The only problem was that the entire thing was a sham. After he died, investigators found the truth in his workshop: a maze of hidden pipes, belts, and a giant compressed air machine in the basement that actually powered the miraculous engine. He wasn't a genius inventor. He was a stage magician who had figured out that investors were a much easier audience to fool than people at a theater. 23. Robert Spring was a forger with a very specific and very profitable niche. He was the #1 manufacturer of fake George Washington autographs. In the mid-19th century, a time of intense patriotism, owning a document signed by the first president was a huge status symbol. Spring capitalized on this by churning out countless forged letters and documents. He was so prolific that some experts joked he had signed Washington's name more times than Washington himself. His masterstroke of audacity was selling presidential pardons to former Confederate soldiers, supposedly signed by the late Abraham Lincoln. He wasn't just faking history, he was creating entirely new and completely impossible historical artifacts for a quick buck. 24. Before computers could execute 1,000,000 trades a second, the Blanc brothers found a low-tech way to master the art of insider trading in the 1830s. They bribed the operators of the official French semaphore telegraph line, the fastest communication system of the day, which used giant swinging arms on towers to send messages across the country. The brothers had the operators add a special secret symbol to the end of official messages about the Paris stock market's performance, indicating whether the market was going up or down. Their own agent in Bordeaux would see the secret signal, get the news hours before anyone else, and make a fortune on the stock market. It was a brilliant analog hack of the most advanced technology of its time. 25. The Drake inheritance hoax was a scam that played the long game, preying on one of the most powerful human emotions: the hope that you're secretly related to someone incredibly rich. Starting in the 19th century, con artists spread the story that the famous explorer Sir Francis Drake had left behind a massive, unclaimed fortune. All anyone with the last name Drake had to do was pay a small fee to the scammers, who were posing as lawyers and genealogists, to prove their lineage and claim their share. The fortune, of course, was completely imaginary. But for decades, thousands of hopeful Drakes across the United States and England poured their money into this genealogical ghost hunt, all chasing a family fortune that never existed. It was the ultimate subscription service for wishful thinking. 26. Robbing a bank is one thing, but George Bidwell decided to rob the entire Bank of England, and he planned to do it without ever setting foot inside the vault. In the 1870s, this incredibly suave American con man and his crew launched a sophisticated forgery scheme. They set themselves up as legitimate businessmen, opened an account at the bank, and began presenting flawlessly forged bills of exchange for payment. These are essentially IOUs between businesses. The forgeries were so perfect, and their business persona so convincing, that the Bank of England happily cashed them for months, handing over piles of money for goods that were never bought or sold. They managed to drain the equivalent of tens of millions of today's dollars before anyone noticed a single thing was wrong. They didn't break in, they just asked for the money politely, with excellent paperwork. 27. Madame Dise de Bar was a 19th century psychic who claimed to have a very unique artistic talent. She could channel the spirits of long-dead master painters like Raphael and Rembrandt, who would then paint new masterpieces through her. During her seances, she would be tied up inside a cabinet, and miraculously, a fully finished painting would appear moments later. Her followers were astounded by this direct line to the art world's greatest ghosts. The reality was a little less supernatural. She was an accomplished amateur painter and a skilled contortionist who could easily slip out of her ropes, quickly paint something in the dark, and then tie herself back up. She wasn't channeling spirits. She was just really good at multitasking under pressure. 28. P.T. Barnum, the legendary showman, had a simple philosophy: never let the truth get in the way of a good story, especially if that story involves a freak of nature. His most famous exhibit was the Fiji mermaid. He advertised it as the mummified remains of a real-life mermaid, a creature that was half mammal, half fish. People lined up around the block to see this marvel of the natural world. What they actually saw was the grotesque upper body of a baby monkey sewn onto the tail of a large fish. It was a monstrosity, a taxidermy nightmare that looked less like a beautiful sea maiden and more like something a mad scientist would throw in the trash. But Barnum sold the story so well that people saw what they wanted to see: proof that the world was weirder than they imagined. 29. Most imposters pretend to be a single person, like a long-lost heir or a minor noble. Stanley Clifford Wayman was in a league of his own. He impersonated entire governments. This man's hobby was posing as high-ranking officials for the sheer thrill of it. He once posed as the naval liaison for the State Department and gave a glowing dinner speech to a group of Army officers. His most famous stunt was in 1921, when he impersonated a U.S. Navy officer to gain access to the visiting Crown Princess of Afghanistan, giving her a grand tour of New York City. He wasn't after money. He just craved the excitement and respect that came with the uniform. He was the ultimate gatecrasher, a man who realized that with enough confidence and a well-tailored suit, you could walk into almost any room in the world. 30. In early 20th century New Zealand, Amy Bach pulled off a romantic con so audacious it's still legendary. Posing as a wealthy sheep farmer named Percival Redwood, Amy managed to charm and marry a wealthy landowner's daughter. Amy, as Percival, was the talk of the town, a handsome, charming, and rich young man. She played the part perfectly, securing the engagement and a lavish wedding. The whole charade lasted just long enough for the wedding to happen. The truth only came out a few days after the ceremony when her true identity was exposed. She wasn't a rich farmer. She was a serial con artist with a long history of fraud. It was a scheme that required an incredible amount of nerve and a very convincing fake mustache. 31. Canada. Bill Jones was a 19th century card shark who was so good at cheating, he was practically a magician. He was a master of three-card Monte, a simple sleight-of-hand game that is almost impossible to win. He was so skilled that he once famously said, "A sucker is born every minute," a phrase often misattributed to P.T. Barnum. The truly funny thing about Canada Bill was that while he was a genius at conning others at cards, he was a complete sucker for any other kind of gambling. He would win thousands of dollars in a crooked card game and then immediately lose it all playing faro, a game he knew was often rigged against him. He once complained about a crooked faro game, saying, "I know it's crooked, but it's the only one in town." Is now 32. C.L. Blood was a 19th century medical entrepreneur who combined two of the era's most popular things, quack medicine and thinly veiled threats. He sold a variety of miracle cures, including his famous oxygenized air, which was just scented nitrous oxide that gave his patients a brief, giggly high. He claimed it could cure everything from asthma to paralysis. But his real genius was in his marketing. His newspaper ads not only promised miracle cures, but also warned readers of the dire consequences of not buying his products. He was a master of what he called scare copy, essentially bullying people into buying his snake oil by painting a terrifying picture of their impending doom if they didn't. It was healthcare by way of intimidation. 33. Most people try to avoid becoming a widow. For Ellen Peck, it was a full-time and very profitable professional career. For nearly 40 years in the late 19th century, this woman turned widowhood into an art form. Her method was a masterpiece of repetition. She would find a wealthy, often elderly bachelor and present herself as a fabulously rich widow, temporarily cut off from her dead husband's massive fortune by some legal nonsense. She was so convincing, so tragically charming, that these men would eagerly loan her thousands of dollars to help her unlock her non-existent inheritance. Once she got the money, she would vanish, only to re-emerge in another city with a new name and the same heartbreaking story. She was the queen of the Black Veil, a serial romantic fraudster who proved that a good sob story is worth more than gold. 34. Jabez Balfour understood a golden rule of 19th century society. If you want to get away with stealing a lot of money, make sure you're seen in church every Sunday. Balfour was a respected politician and a devout churchgoer, a man who projected an aura of absolute moral integrity. He used this saintly reputation to create the Liberator Building Society, encouraging thousands of middle-class, God-fearing people to invest their life savings with him. But behind the scenes, Balfour was running a financial shell game, using the company as his personal piggy bank to fund a life of luxury. He was a pillar of the community who was secretly sawing through the floorboards of the entire building. When it all collapsed, he ruined countless families, proving that the most dangerous wolf is the one dressed in sheep's clothing, quoting scripture. 35. Long before Bernie Madoff made Ponzi schemes a household name, John Sadler was running a one-man financial disaster in Ireland that was so epic it became a cautionary tale for generations. As a respected member of parliament and the chairman of a bank in the 1850s, he was the picture of success. In reality, he was a financial black hole. He forged tens of thousands of shares in his own bank, embezzled colossal sums of money, and basically treated the entire Irish banking system like it was his personal expense account. He created a fantasy world of wealth that ruined thousands of real investors when it came crashing down. He wasn't just cooking the books. He was hosting a multi-year barbecue where the only thing on the grill was other people's money. 36. Fanny White was a true 19th century multitasker. By night, she was one of New York's most successful and high-class madams. By day, she was taking the money she earned and beating the titans of Wall Street at their own game. Fanny realized that her brothel wasn't just a place of business, it was an information goldmine. Her clients were some of the most powerful bankers, brokers, and politicians in the country, and they had a tendency to talk business when they were relaxed. Fanny listened. She gathered insider tips and market intelligence that no one else had access to, then used that information to make a fortune on the stock market. She was running a brilliant corporate espionage ring where the price of admission was also the source of the intelligence. 37. If you've ever read Oliver Twist and thought the criminal mastermind Fagin was a bit over the top, meet Ike Solomon. He was the real-life Fagin, and if anything, Charles Dickens toned him down a bit for the book. Active in early 19th century London, Ike wasn't just a petty thief. He was a criminal CEO. He ran a massive empire of thieves, pickpockets, and burglars. He would provide them with safe houses and plan their operations, but his real genius was on the back end. He was the undisputed king of fences, a master at taking stolen goods and making them disappear into a network of pawn shops and shady businesses. He was the Amazon Prime of stolen property, a one-man logistics and distribution center for London's entire criminal underworld. 38. Some con artists use forged documents. Others use charisma. Mary Bateman, the Yorkshire witch, used a chicken. But this wasn't just any chicken. In 1806, this chicken laid eggs with prophecies written on them. Crowds gathered to see the hen lay an egg bearing the message, "Christ is coming." Naturally, people panicked and paid Mary handsomely for charms and potions that would save them from the impending apocalypse. The trick was as simple as it was brilliant. Mary would write on the eggs with acid, which would etch the shell, then carefully push them back inside the poor hen to be laid on command in front of a paying audience. It was a business model built entirely on a very confused chicken and the public's willingness to believe in poultry-based profits. 39. Pietro Balbo saw the waves of poor Italian immigrants arriving in America in the early 20th century and didn't see people in need of help. He saw a customer base with a desperate craving for good luck. Posing as a financial wizard and spiritual guide, he preyed on the hopes of his fellow countrymen. He sold them guaranteed lucky numbers for the lottery, worthless life insurance policies from non-existent companies, and even blessed olive oil that he claimed could cure any disease. He was selling a fantasy of the American dream, perfectly packaged for people who were too desperate to question the details. He wasn't just a scammer, he was a hope merchant, and his inventory was made up entirely of lies. 40. How do you build a transcontinental railroad and get insanely rich at the same time? Simple. You hire a construction company to build it, and you also happen to secretly own that construction company. Then you overcharge yourself into oblivion using government money. This was the beautiful, simple, and wildly illegal idea behind the Credit Mobilier scandal of the 1860s. The directors of the Union Pacific Railroad created a fake construction company and awarded it massive, wildly inflated contracts. Since they were on both sides of the deal, they were just funneling federal loans and land grants directly into their own pockets. To keep the government from looking too closely, they gave cheap shares in this fake company to key congressmen. It was less of a crime and more of a collaborative project between business and politics to rob the nation blind. 41. The Alabama Claims hoax was a masterwork of bureaucratic grifting that popped up after the Civil War. During the war, British-built Confederate ships, like the CSS Alabama, had sunk numerous Union vessels. After the conflict, an international tribunal ordered Britain to pay the United States $15.5 million in damages. This created a fund to compensate American merchants who had lost ships. Naturally, an army of fraudsters emerged from the woodwork. They created entire fleets of phantom ships that had supposedly been sunk, complete with forged manifests, fake crew lists, and heartbreaking tales of lost cargo. It was a massive exercise in creative writing, where con artists invented maritime tragedies out of thin air to claim a slice of the government's settlement pie, turning historical reparations into a national fraud free-for-all. 42. Some people sell bridges, others think bigger. Louis Blondin-Cross looked at Niagara Falls, one of the natural wonders of the world, and decided it was prime, sellable real estate. In the early 20th century, Cross wasn't just some small-time hustler. He was a con man with a flair for the theatrical. He posed as a representative of both the US and Canadian governments and sold deeds to the falls, the surrounding parkland, and even the Maid of the Mist boat tour. He had official-looking documents, a very serious demeanor, and the sheer, unadulterated nerve to sell a landmark that was clearly not for sale. He successfully sold Niagara Falls multiple times, proving that if your lie is big enough and your suit is nice enough, some people will believe you own anything. 43. In 1899, a Boston-based company called the Franklin Syndicate made a promise that should have been a giant, flashing red flag to every human on the planet. They offered their investors a return of 10% per week, which adds up to a staggering 520% a year. The mastermind, William Miller, claimed he had a secret foolproof system for playing the stock market. In reality, his system was just paying off early investors with the money pouring in from new, gullible ones. It was a textbook Ponzi scheme, but it was wrapped in such an exciting package of quick riches that people ignored every single law of financial gravity. The syndicate became a national sensation before it inevitably and spectacularly collapsed, serving as a powerful reminder that if an investment sounds too good to be true, it's probably about to take all your money. 44. Whitaker Wright was a 19th century mining tycoon who wanted to live like a Bond villain before James Bond even existed. After making a fortune in questionable mining stocks, he built a lavish estate called Whitley Park. His crown jewel was an incredible underwater ballroom. It was a massive conservatory with thick glass walls and a glass ceiling, built at the bottom of a private lake. Guests would descend a spiral staircase to find themselves in a shimmering underwater palace where they could dance and dine while fish swam overhead. It was the ultimate display of eccentric wealth, but it was all funded by a massive financial fraud. When his empire collapsed, Wright cemented his legacy as a man whose financial foundations were as shaky as his ballrooms were revolutionary. From fake aristocrats to ghost-whispering teenagers, these historical hustlers prove that a good story, no matter how ridiculous, can be the most powerful weapon of all. It's a wild ride through the audacity of the past. So, I have to ask, which of these con artists do you find the most fascinatingly brilliant? Was it the guy who sold a country or the man with the underwater ballroom? Drop your choice in the comments below. And if you crave more bizarre tales from history's weirdest corners, hit that like button and subscribe for more. You won't regret it.